Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. I am coming to you from Dallas, Texas. Yesterday it was New Orleans. We had a great dinner with a few people on FinTwit, Danielle DiMartino Booth being one of them. And then this morning I spoke at 8:40 in the morning. It went really well. Happened to get a standing ovation, which was really nice of the crowd. And I guess that doesn't happen too often there, but it wasn't about me. It was about the message. And the message that I was talking about was personal liberty, freedom, and free market capitalism. So everyone's and everyone there really understands how important those topics are today. But in the green room, I met Jim Rickards, who is someone who I have learned a lot from. It was really just awesome having the opportunity to meet Jim Rickards and, of course, Jim Grant the other day. I wasn't able to do a panel discussion with Jim Rickards, but we had a lot to talk about, as you can imagine, in the green room. And the first thing that we talked about is the thing that's on everyone's mind, like I said, is just really personal liberty and freedom. And he felt very out of place there, just like I did, because of the draconian restrictions that they have in New Orleans, where they require you to present a medicine passport, we'll call it, or a proof of a negative cerveza sickness test. But they don't even, you can't even have I forgot what the difference between the tests are, but you have to have a specific negative test as well. So Jim comes in just flustered. He's like, holy cow. He goes, I haven't eaten in like 24 hours. Like, what? What's going on? He goes, no restaurant will let me in. He goes, I can't eat food anywhere. I'm gonna have to pillage through the dumpster in the back just to get some snacks. That's the insanity, really, the insanity of the world we are living in, unfortunately, in some areas. Now, obviously, there are parts of the United States that are a lot better, such as Arizona, such as Texas, such as Florida. On a bright note, when I was walking through the airport in Dallas today, I would say probably 10-15% of people, even in the airport, were not wearing masks. They were just really participating or showing their kind of civil disobedience and that federal law, and they're just kind of, no, we're not going to do it. And that was good to see that people are kind of standing up for their rights and their freedom of choice, especially here in Dallas. But that was kind of a funny story with Jim. But we started talking about economics, and then he went up on stage and had a panel discussion with Danielle DiMartino Booth, with John Najarian, and Russell Gray from the real estate guys, and they were talking about the future of money and things we talk about here: depreciation, or excuse me, not depreciation, deflation. I'm sorry, inflation, and whether or not inflation is transitory, disinflation. And Jim's latest book came out talking about deflation, but he really made the point to clarify things, and that short term he would be a deflationist. But I think it's better to put him in the camp of Grant Williams, and that long term, and I mean, even Jim said today that looking out a year and a half, 2 years, he's definitely in the inflation camp. But he thinks that short term, because of the political environment and them kind of coming to a stalemate to where they can't continue to spend the trillions and trillions of dollars. Well, it'll be 3 trillion, let's say, but they can't spend 5 trillion, 6 trillion, 8 trillion, 10 trillion, and keep the deficit spending growing exponentially like they could in 2020 because there was a crisis. So he says, okay, now we're in this period of time where the politicians aren't going to agree. They're not going to be able to spend as much money. And therefore, the demand side of the equation, we will see that really tail off because the stimmy checks will go down and people have to start paying their rent. People have to start paying their mortgage. It's a very good argument. And he wasn't really looking at the supply side. I would argue that if you look at that, I think prices at the very best are going to flatline from here. I think they'll continue to go up in most cases. But his argument really revolved around the next 6 months, the next year, and really in asset prices. I know or according to him, he talks about deflation in his book, but he's really talking about asset prices. He's not so much talking about consumer prices. At least that's not what we were talking about. And he made that clarification. And when he was up on stage, also, when these investment professionals and Danielle and John Nigerian included in there, they and Russ doesn't do this so much because he's kind of like us. He's more, an average Joe. This isn't his profession. He's more of a real estate guy. But when they get a question about deflation, for them, they're really honing in on the question of asset prices. They're not really answering the question about if the prices that you pay at the grocery store will go up or down. And so we've got to differentiate between three things when we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with the dollar or inflation, deflation. You got to look at assets, you've got to look at consumer prices, and then you've got to look at the dollar on the DXY against foreign currencies. Because just because the dollar is going up on the DXY doesn't necessarily mean that the prices of the stuff you buy is going down, meaning the dollar is appreciating against that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the stock market's going down. So your dollar could be appreciating against euros, but it could be, make sure I said that correctly. The dollar could be appreciating in value against euros or Colombian pesos or Mexican pesos, but it could be depreciating in value against the stuff that you buy daily, or Bitcoin, as an example, or real estate, or your shares of Tesla or whatever. So we've really got to look at the nuance when we're trying to answer that question and figure out the probabilities, therefore figure out how we want to set up our portfolios moving forward to make sure that we're doing our best to build wealth and thrive in a world of out of control central banks and big governments. So that was kind of the nuance to Jim's discussion, and I was talking to him in the green room more about the freedom stuff, where this is going long term. Lockdowns. One thing he and I were discussing is the fact that over the last 20 years we've had what's called a cerveza sickness once every 3 or 4 years. So it was the swine flu, it was the bird flu, it was I think that was the same as H1N1, the swine flu. We had the first round of what I can't mention. You guys know what I'm talking about. Back in, I believe it's 2000, 2001. We had MERS as well. We had Ebola. We had a few others. So you see these things coming up. And that was one of my questions to Jim. I said, what do you think is going to happen if or when we get the next cerveza sickness, whatever you want to call it? Let's say that's in 2024 or 2025. I said, do you think that there's kind of a precedence that the government has to where this is their standard operating procedure? And it's like shoot first, ask questions later. And what I mean by that is if just any little cerveza sickness comes up in Africa or Asia, or maybe it's Canada this time, or Australia or whatever, is the immediate response from the majority of the politicians and majority of states in the United States going to be bam, lockdown? Even if it's not that big of a deal, let's lock down first, and then we'll figure out if it's something that we should actually be concerned with. And then it turns into this whole political debate, and you guys know how that ends. And and what I mean by that is it'll most likely end the same way the Patriot Act did, the same way that lockdowns have in 2020. And if that happens in the future, it means us giving up more of our freedom and liberty, and the central planners taking more and more and more of that control and micromanaging our life. I've talked about this several times on my channel, as you guys know, but I just wanted to let you know that when I brought it up with Rickards, it is something that he has thought about, and it is something that he is that he's very concerned with. And he, he said, he didn't say, yeah, that's definitely going to happen, but he thinks the probability would be high that if we do have another cerveza sickness, that would be the way they'd tackle the problem. And so I think the takeaway there from that conversation is, if you don't have a plan B, you got to set one of those up this weekend, and you've got to have that line in the sand that needs to be premeditated. So if you're living in California, as an example, you need to look yourself in the mirror and ask the question, at what point will I move? What does the government need to do to where I say, enough is enough, I'm out? And I know it's a very difficult question to answer because we all have families, we have friends, we have kind of our little network, and that's not something that we want to lose. But for every one of us that's on this live stream or watch this video, there is a line in the sand, right? If California turned into Australia, my guess is whomever is on this live stream or watches it, that would definitely be their line in the sand where they'd be like, okay, I'm out. My point is that needs to be premeditated, because it needs to be a decision or something that you think through absent emotions to the best of your ability. Because if you make that decision or you become reactionary and emotional, and you're going to make bad decisions. But if it's premeditated, if you think through before it happens, okay, where's my line in the sand? Then you're going to have a specific game plan that's going to be well thought out, and then all you have to do is execute. Another benefit is that you won't continue to make excuses for what the government is doing. You see, if we don't have that line in the sand, the government can do this and this and this and this, things that you never thought they would, but you keep kind of rationalizing it. Like, well, okay, I mean, Gavin Newsom, so I can't use a leaf blower anymore. Or, okay, well, Gavin Newsom is paying people to not take drugs. Or, there's no more Walgreens in San Francisco because they get robbed so much that it's not profitable, so they're all leaving the state. Well, the state of California is in a big argument with In-N-Out Burger because they want In-N-Out Burger to be the medicine police. Let's say, oh, well, sure, when I go to a toy store now, Gavin Newsom said they have to have an aisle for gender neutral toys. Oh, okay. You see what I'm saying? You keep rationalizing it and say, well, it hasn't affected me yet. And, well, sure, they have a medicine mandate, but I can just go get, I can Photoshop something. It's not that big of a deal. You see, that's the position that you don't want to be in. So I would encourage all of you to think through that plan B, but maybe even more importantly, decide for yourself where your line in the sand is. And then if the government crosses it, then you can go ahead and take action in a way that's absent emotion as much as possible, in a way that's prudent, and that will ensure the maximum amount of freedom for yourself and your family moving forward. So I'm going to head downstairs, guys. I'm actually at Simon Black's conference right now. I'll be speaking tomorrow. Really looking forward to that. So I've got my sister here, my mom, my niece. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure they're getting in and having a good time. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you always remember to stand up and fight for freedom, fight for liberty and free market capitalism. We'll see you on the next video.